My name is Joshua Zeller, and welcome to Cultural Catholic, the only show run by a cultural Catholic to bring you the latest in news on the political, international, and societal level. Now, you may be asking, what is a cultural Catholic? Well, in the United States, according to my sociology of religion professor, within the Catholic community, there are three separate groups: the Latino or Hispanic Catholic, the intentional Catholic, and the cultural Catholic. Each of these equally split up the American Catholic population into three equal groups. The Latino Hispanic Catholic are people from Latin America, such as Mexico, the Caribbean, and Central and South America. Now, they tend to be very liberal, which is good for Democrats, obviously. However, there is one group that does not fit this norm, and that group is the Cuban Americans, simply because the Republicans have been much more anti-Castro, which is what most Cuban Americans actually kind of like, so that's why they tend to be much more conservative. That's why we have our Marco Rubios on the Republican side instead of the Democratic side. Ted Cruz is an anomaly in that he is not a Catholic, but a evangelical Protestant, and that's a whole nother story. And when Justice Sotomayor was being nominated to be put on the bench, she was identified as a cultural Catholic, and USA Today, however spotty their reporting can be, actually did a very good job in explaining at least two of the different kinds of Catholics, the cultural and the intentional. Now, the intentional tend to be conservative. They tend to be white or African American or Asian, any of the other racial groups in the country. They tend to be fairly upper middle class or upper class, and they tend to be fairly wealthy, and they tend to follow the Catholic doctrine much more stringently than the other two kinds of Catholic. However, the Latino and Hispanic Catholics tend to fall in line with the marriage part of Catholic doctrine, much like the intentional Catholics, and fall in much more liberal ideas, like they're somewhat okay with abortion, much like the Catholic doctrine is in cases of incest, rape, and there's something I can't remember exactly what it is. And then you have the cultural Catholic, like me. We tend to be the same racial groups as the intentional Catholic. However, we also tend to be much more lower or upper middle class. We also tend to not find the importance in the dogma, but we tend to find much more importance in the identity itself or the rituals behind the Catholic that make up Catholic practice, and ultimately, as sociologists tend to argue, led to the dogma that we have. And so we tend to be much more liberal, vote for Democrats, and that's basically what the American Catholic population is. Now that I've given you guys a little lesson on this unique part of the American Catholic experience, we should now go on to a very interesting bit of news from Ireland. The BBC did a very nice job in summing up what's going on in Ireland. Now, in Ireland right now, they're having a referendum. Well, they had one actually very recently on whether or not to have legalized same-sex marriage in their country. Now, in 2010, they legalized civil unions, which have many of the same opportunities as marriage, but don't have the same legal protections in Ireland, much like in anywhere else, as marriage does. And this was a huge step for Ireland, just like 22 years ago, when they decriminalized homosexual acts, which is a huge step in human rights. Now, this is an important step for the same-sex marriage and LGBTQ rights movement in the entire world as a whole, because it will be the only country that has a popular referendum to legalize same-sex marriage. Now, Ireland is unique in this fact, in that their constitution can only be changed through popular referendum. And actually, yesterday for Ireland, actually probably 2 days ago now, they legalized it with an overwhelming majority. All the counties that reported, of them all, only one of them voted against this amendment, and so this is a huge step forward for LGBTQ rights and same-sex marriage in the world as a whole. It was an overwhelming mandate with over 60% of the population saying, yes, we find this to be an important step forward in Irish development. A lot of people actually came back to Ireland to vote in this referendum, saying they wanted to make Ireland better for when they returned. And actually, almost every single political party and every major corporation and business in Ireland supported this amendment, and as did most religious organizations, just like the Catholic Church. But since the referendum passed, they've conceded defeat, and they're now saying, okay, we see that we lost, and we still reserve the right. And they can still say, we reserve the right to say, no, we aren't going to officiate your marriage, but we aren't going to say that you can't get married. So, I mean, yes, the Catholic Church is still very far behind in that it is against gay marriage. But Ireland, which is reputed to be the most religious country in Europe, possibly even the world after the United States, to legalize same-sex marriage. So that is our European segment. Now we need to move to Iraq and Syria, which is very important. Recently, in Iraq, the Islamic State, or ISIS, or ISIL, however you want to say it, they recently took Ramadi, which is the largest and most important city in the Anbar province, in that it is the capital of Anbar province. Anbar province covers a large amount of territory. It borders Syria, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, and it's actually most of where ISIS charged into when it came into Syria. Now, ISIS, as our earlier narrative liked to tell us, was not so much of an led by secular groups, but was led by al-Baghdadi. However, we have learned over the past few months that al-Baghdadi is more of the religious leader / the figurehead, and there are Baathists that are in charge of the everyday military and intelligence gathering operations of the Islamic State military. So not only does it have massive combat experience on the ground level with having experienced combat in both Iraq and Syria, it also has this massive analytical and strategic capabilities through the Baathists that were once the generals and the intelligence officers in the Iraqi military and led the Iraqi government. And so that made it a very potent threat. And it played off of the Sunni-Shia divide in Iraq. Just to let you guys know, the Shia part of Islam, which makes about 15% of the Islamic population, do not like being called Shiite. It's Shia or Shi'i. And they were able to play off of the Sunni-Shia divide because the Shia government and the Shias in Iraq, not Islam as a whole, but in Iraq itself, make up the majority of the population. And if you add in the Kurds, they just make up an overwhelming majority over the Sunni. The Shia government largely persecuted the Sunni minority, and by doing so, they created all this tension and anger within the Sunni population. And ultimately, when ISIS rolled in, a lot of Sunnis joined up. Now, that's not to say that all Sunnis joined up. There were a lot of tribes, and there are a lot of police forces that are Sunni that are majority Sunni or Sunni exclusively that did put up a fight, but they were not armed efficiently by the Iraqi government. And now the Iraqi government, in conjunction with the arms that we are most definitely selling them, and the paramilitary militias that are being backed by Iran and being put on the front lines by the Iraqi government, are making headway, but they're not making the same amount of headway. Now they are making moves on Ramadi. There was a report by Voice of America that pointed out how the militias are now about 4 miles from Ramadi. They're putting up a fight against ISIS forces. I don't know how it's going to turn out. I mean, the Shia militias are very effective, but they have a horrible human rights record. They are being accused of wantonly murdering Sunni individuals, even if they have no affiliation with ISIS. And there are a lot of Sunnis who, like I said, do not support ISIS, but it's looking like they might end up supporting ISIS because the Shia militias are constantly murdering them with American weapons. And Vice recently did a very, very good piece on how we're selling this military equipment to Iraq, and we have this official policy that says we are not allowed to sell any equipment to any government or entity that is violating human rights, and yet we're doing it because the military-industrial complex, which actually runs the American military, which actually runs the defense capabilities and department in the United States, and the intelligence community in the United States, is actually wants to make as much money as humanly possible. They don't care what happens to anyone else, so long as it doesn't affect their bottom line. And in doing so, they're making this problem much worse. And unfortunately, it's going to end. This war in Iraq is going to go on much longer than anyone had ever anticipated. I'm going to say right now, just to get this off of my chest, we should not have gone in. I remember back in 2003, I was a little kid back then. My dad kept on saying we shouldn't go in, and I just parroted it because I was a little kid. I didn't know any better. But now that I'm an adult, now that I know a little bit about the world, I can see that we should not have gone in because the Sunni, the Shia, the Kurds, they hate each other. I mean, the Kurds and the Shia, they get along a little bit, but that's only because they were violently oppressed by the Sunni government under Saddam Hussein. Even though he was a Ba'athist and a secularist, he supported the Sunnis, and ultimately that helped him out in maintaining control, because if you have at least a decent portion of the population supporting you and going into your armed forces and are sufficiently loyal enough in certain units, you ultimately will be able to maintain control. But once we went in and took out that control, everything just fell apart. The 1919 borders that the European powers and America set up after the fall of the Ottoman Empire is completely screwing everyone that lives there, and ultimately we did not need to go in there at all. And speaking of terrorism, a few weeks ago, a man named Seymour Hersh, who is known for very good investigative journalism, he's the guy who uncovered the Abu Ghraib human rights violations. He recently published a story in the London Review of Books on what actually happened to Osama bin Laden. Now, he has this big conspiracy theory that basically says Pakistan had Osama bin Laden since 2006. They didn't have him in the compound we found him in, but in a prison facility. A member of the Pakistani intelligence community went in and said, "We know where he is. If you give me the money, I'll show you where he is." They brought in SEALs, they took him to his room, and they just destroyed him with their rifles. And when they were going back to Afghanistan, they were just throwing bits and pieces of him off of the out of the helicopter and into the Hindu Kush Mountains. And it was also that Pakistan could get a greater and more freer hand in the everyday running of Afghanistan. Now, there are some things that I'm willing to concede to Seymour Hersh. I will concede that the Pakistanis knew where he was. I'm not going to say he was their prisoner. I will concede that he did not have any operational control or any intelligence. Again, I'm not going to say that he was their prisoner. I think he was in a compound. Now, the reason why I don't think Seymour Hersh is being entirely credible is that his sources are very shoddy. One of his Pakistani source has not been in the intelligence community since 1992. The Pakistani intelligence agency in and of itself is very much in bed with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. So that's why I'm willing to say that they knew where he was, because they like him. And the two biggest reasons why I don't think everything that Seymour Hersh said is true is, one, this hugely destabilized our relationship with Pakistan. Now, it could be this big, huge conspiracy that they're playing the angry, hurt ally who feels that their trust was broken by the United States. It could be all an act. I don't think so personally, but I could be wrong. And two, we had to blow up a stealth helicopter because it crash landed. We would not do that under any other circumstance unless it actually crashed and we couldn't get it fixed and up off the ground. Now, I'm not saying that I know everything about the United States military. I know a little bit. I know enough to get by in a reasonable debate. But we destroyed it because we didn't want anyone to get their hands on the technology to reverse engineer it and to give themselves a leg up over their enemies. Now, you might say, well, wait, isn't Pakistan our ally? Yes, they are, but they're the sworn enemy of another ally of ours, India. And if they have a leg up on India, that could destabilize the region and lead to a nuclear war, which nobody wants. So that's why I don't think everything that Seymour Hersh said is true. Some of his sources are shoddy, especially that Pakistani intelligence official. And there's also the fact that to completely destroy a human body so much with small arms fire that you're able to pick up pieces and throw it out of a helicopter, that takes a massive amount of time and a massive amount of ammunition. You have that is not something that anyone would think of to do. Now, did we execute him? Yes. It was a flat-out execution. I understand. I think he should have gone to been put on trial, but I do understand why he was just flat-out executed. He was someone that was our sworn enemy. We'd be looking for him for a very, very long time. And ultimately, when we did find him, our SEAL Team 6 guys decided, yeah, I don't want to have to deal with him getting off. Let's just kill him. I get that. Don't get me wrong. I understand that. Do I agree with it entirely? No. But I understand it. And now, the big attack Osama bin Laden helped plan the biggest attack in American history on American soil, which ultimately led to the Patriot Act. And now, a few years ago, we learned from Edward Snowden through his leaks that the United States government is observing all of our phone calls. Granted, it doesn't tell what the content is or who was calling who. It just takes this number called this number, and this call lasted X amount of time. And recently, Rand Paul did a 10-hour attempt to talk renewal to death to make sure that the Patriot Act, which expires at midnight on May 31st, to not get renewed. When I first learned about it, I thought Edward Snowden shouldn't have done that. It could have harmed our national security. I have since involved in my position. The United States government should not be spying on our calls, on our emails, on our texts, on anything that we do without a court order. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, this program has court approval, but it's the FISA court, and it's basically a giant rubber stamp that says, if you want to do anything, go ahead. And of all the times that they've said no, they've only said no about, I could be wrong on this number, but it is a low number. About 5% of the time they say no, but the rest of the time they say okay. And that's just the times that they go to the FISA court for approval. Now, the Senate and House of Representatives just went on a week-long break after 6 weeks in session. ABC News wrote a little bit on how they don't really have a lot of time when they come back from this recess to do anything about this renewal of the Patriot Act. Now, I don't think it should be renewed at all. Maybe they should go back once it's expired and renew certain programs. I'm not sure what all the programs are. When this passed, I was a very small child, and since then I've just gone with the flow. But I will probably get more informed on this as time goes by, try to find out more things. There are certain things that should not be in there, like giving cops basically free rein to arrest anybody. That might not be something in there, I could be wrong, but it did give cops freer rein in arrests, or at least detentions. It did allow these monitoring programs, which should not be around at all anymore. And the people who say this is getting us actionable intelligence, it's not true at all. Absolutely nothing that we've ever stopped, like the underwear bomber, the Times Square bomber, none of those were stopped because of these programs. Absolutely none. Now, with this past session of Congress, Mitch McConnell, who's now the majority leader, had promised that he would run a much more efficient Congress, that the committee system would be used and used properly. But that has not happened, because the Democrats are doing exactly what he did to them when the Republicans were in the minority. Now, he probably thought, well, we're going to be reasonable in that we're going to argue for everything that we want. We have the majority, but they don't have a filibuster-proof majority, and they definitely don't have a veto override majority. So they have... Now, I personally think that both parties have good ideas. Both parties need to work together. But since President Obama became elected, possibly even farther back since Bush got elected, George II, not George Bush the second, not Bush the first. Since Bush got elected, Democrats and Republicans have been fighting each other tooth and nail over everything. It just intensified since the 2008 election. And Mitch McConnell was unable to get anything that he wanted done. He was unable to maintain any control. And so hopefully when they come back, Mitch McConnell will have wised up and realized, I need to actually work with these guys, the Democrats. I need to listen to what they have to say. I can't just say no to it offhand. I actually need to listen, and I actually need to give them some of the things that they want and not just try to get everything that I want done. And finally, for today, some of the five of the mega banks, JP Morgan, Chase, Rolls, Bank of Scotland, and two others, were recently were found guilty by way of pleading out of fixing the price of currency so as to make massive monetary gains, just massive monetary gains. And by doing so, they possibly helped tank the economy and make it worse, even make it suck even longer. And they've been punished, but not how you would think. They've been fined $5 billion. and it's been split up different ways between the five. It's not exactly $1 billion per company, but there have been no prosecutions of individuals. There has been no jailing of individuals, and the people who have to actually pay this money are the shareholders of the companies. So basically, everyone who's taking a hit are the people who fund the banks, which means ultimately that it was a slap on the wrist. Ultimately, they're going to go about and do it all over again. Now, what I think that should have happened, and Kyle Kalinske on his show made a very good point on it, they should be broken up because these guys are basically running monopolies. They're working together, they're talking together, so they could basically be the same company, considered the same company now. And the way that they organized this all was they had a chat room called the Cartel. Now, if you call yourselves the Cartel, you're already doing some really bad stuff. And so, probably should be broken up because they're all basically the same company now. All of the people on top, because they probably knew about it, they probably were the ones who planned it, should be convicted and sent to jail for a long time. And these guys and the companies themselves should be forced to pay out of the nose, not the shareholders, but the people who made the decisions, the companies that made the decisions, because apparently corporations are people. They should be made to pay out the nose for making the American people suffer. Now, I'm not saying that it's the best solution, but I'm saying that is the most reasonable solution that anyone could ever have for this issue. Alright, that is my time. Again, I'm Joshua Zeller, and I am your Cultural Catholic. Signing off.